You hear the term government shutdown thrown around on the news all the time, right? It's always wrapped up in some kind of political drama. But what does it actually mean? What really happens when the most powerful government in the world just turns off the lights? Well, let's get into it.
I mean, it sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? The government flat out runs out of cash. But this isn't fiction. It's a real thing that happens. And believe it or not, it's been happening more and more often. And the consequences, well, they're felt by millions.
So here's the key thing to understand. A government shutdown isn't some kind of constitutional crisis. It's actually a procedural failure. It's what happens when Congress just can't agree on a budget, these things called appropriations bills, to fund everything for the next fiscal year. Once that deadline hits and there's no deal, well, the government is legally required to start shutting down anything that's considered non-essential. Okay, so what does turning off the lights actually look like in the real world? The impact is immediate, and it basically splits the entire federal workforce right down the middle into two very different groups.
This is where it gets kind of wild. On one side, you've got your non-essential employees. They get furloughed, which is really just a formal way of saying they're sent home and they don't get paid. Then you have the essential workers. Think air traffic controllers, military personnel, federal law enforcement, people whose jobs protect life and property. They have to show up to work. But here's the real kicker. They don't get paid either, at least not until the whole thing is over. Imagine that.
The closures are probably the first thing most of us would notice. You planned a family trip to Yosemite? Sorry, it's closed. Wanted to see the Smithsonian? Nope, closed. Need to call the IRS for help with your taxes? Good luck. Their services are cut way back. And then there's the stuff we don't see. Critical scientific research gets put on hold, and even some safety investigations have to stop in their tracks. But not everything just grinds to a halt. The absolute critical services keep running. The military stays on duty. Air traffic controllers are still in their towers guiding planes. You'll still get your mail. That's because the Postal Service actually funds itself. And importantly, Social Security and Medicare checks still go out. Oh, and here's an interesting one. The president and members of Congress, they still get paid. Their salaries are protected by the Constitution, so a shutdown doesn't affect their paychecks. So how on earth do we even get to this point? It all boils down to the basic process of funding the government, which, let's be honest, in today's political climate, is like navigating a minefield. On paper, it seems pretty straightforward, right? Congress comes up with the spending bills. Both the House and the Senate have to pass the exact same versions of those bills. And finally, the president has to sign them into law. But when you have a divided government where different parties control each of those steps, every single stage becomes a battle. And if they can't compromise before the deadline, a shutdown is pretty much guaranteed. Now, here's a fascinating bit of history for you. For more than 100 years, this didn't happen. If Congress missed a deadline, government agencies just kept going. They figured Congress would sort it out eventually. But that all changed in 1980. The Attorney General at the time issued a new legal opinion that reinterpreted this old law from 1870, the Anti-Deficiency Act. And suddenly, it became mandatory for agencies to shut down if they didn't have funding. That one decision created the modern government shutdown as we know it today. And ever since that 1980 opinion, we've seen a really clear and frankly kind of troubling trend. What used to be a very rare accident has slowly morphed into a political weapon that gets pulled out again and again. Looking at this timeline, you can see the escalation. After that first one in 1980, things got more intense. In the mid-90s, we had a huge 21-day shutdown over the fundamental size of government. Fast forward to 2013, and it was a fight over a specific law, the Affordable Care Act. Then came 2018-19, a bitter 35-day standoff over border wall funding that became the longest shutdown in American history. Each one seems to get longer, and the politics behind them way more divisive. Just let that sink in for a second. 35 days. That was the record set back in 2018 and 2019. For over a month, hundreds of thousands of federal workers were either forced to work without a paycheck or just sent home with no idea when they'd get paid again. It was a massive, massive disruption that showed just how bad these political deadlocks could get. And here's the thing. The problems don't just stop when an agreement is finally reached and the government reopens. The damage, the economic and social costs can linger for years, creating this ripple effect that spreads across the whole country. So let's talk numbers. The Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, they ran the numbers on that 35-day shutdown. Their estimate? It cost the U.S. economy a staggering $11 billion. That's billions in lost productivity, lost business for private contractors, and lost spending from all those federal workers who suddenly had no income.
And this is the part that really gets me. Not all of that economic activity just bounces back. The CBO concluded that $3 billion of that loss was permanent. It was just gone forever. It's a huge reminder that you can't just turn the government off and on like a light switch without doing some real lasting damage.
And beyond that big sticker price, there are so many hidden costs. The government loses money from things like national park entrance fees. Crucial medical research gets delayed. But some of the most serious impacts are on the most vulnerable people. During that long shutdown in 2018-19, there was a very real threat of funding shortages for food assistance programs like SNAP, which millions of Americans depend on. This quote from political analyst Michelle Buellman really just hits the nail on the head. Shutdowns aren't just an accident anymore. They've become a strategy. They're a political tool, a high-stakes game of chicken where one side tries to force the other to give in, using the American people and government services as leverage. Which brings us to the final, and maybe most unsettling question of all. When you look at how often they're happening, how long they're lasting, and how they've turned into a political weapon, have government shutdowns just become the new normal? Is this just a standard part of American politics now? There's no easy answer, but it's a question that really gets to the heart of the challenge of governing a country that's this divided.